I'm Alexander Brazie. That's like zebra backwards, as my mom used to say. And yeah, I've been a game designer for a very long time. It started out when I was 13 years old, working for a French video game company called Saboteur Online, and a game called Growl Online. And back then, the internet was different. You didn't really have photo, video, or even audio, right? It was very rare to even hear audio clips. So I just told people I was 24, and they're like, "Oh, you want to work with us on this thing?" So I spent 3 years working when I was 13 years old, working on this French video game. Anyways, fast forward a number of years, and I ended up working as a modder on World of Warcraft through a friend of mine invited me to the very first Friends and Family Alpha, the Tri-Horde push back in the day. Yeah, and I ended up just realizing I could tweak and change the interface, and I put together a team of other people doing the same. And so the Cosmos UI project was born, and we shipped that regularly for, God, years. I think it was like 4 or 5 years. A number of years in, I ended up working for Microsoft. Loved that job. Actually got to have dinner with Bill and Melinda Gates in their home. And then I realized I didn't really like working on Windows and a lot of Windows, adjacent software. So ended up going and catching a flight down to San Clemente to stay at my friend Luke's home. Slept on his porch. He had a little one-bedroom place, a nice porch with a hammock. So I slept on the hammock. And that ended up leading to me meeting some folks who invited me to lunch, and they ended up being game designers on World of Warcraft. Talked to them. They had a meeting with me a week later with what turned out to be the three leads. And I thought I could ask questions about game design, and they're like, you know what, we like your answers. In particular, there's one I really said I didn't like Shadow of the Colossus. And the guy said, well, I loved Shadow of the Colossus. I'm like, well, here's why I didn't like it. And he's like, I voted for it as Game of the Year. I'm like, you're welcome to have done that, but I don't agree with you for this reason, that reason. And that sort of ability to, respect his position, but also argue my own, stuck with him. And so a few days later, he was the deciding vote to give me an offer. And so I started on World of Warcraft at the end of Classic. Nox Ramus was shipping, and worked on the Burning Crusade and pretty much every expansion after that until the middle end of Mists of Pandaria. That's when I departed with Blizzard. So after that, I went on to work for Riot Games on League of Legends, a couple of their unannounced projects, including the ARPG that never launched. That now has been fully canceled, so I don't mind saying they were working on it. Did that for a number of years. Papa Tencent eventually bought out Riot. And then I started my own game studio, Atomic, made a little side-scrolling action game. And then that led to me working on Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which led to me working on being the foundational designer for No Rest for the Wicked. Pretty much I was the first full-time designer on that. The founder and the lead programmer on it were the lead programmer was pretty dedicated. Robin's phenomenal. Robin Hubs it is Valve now. But the owner of the company was busy shipping Ori 2, so I put my time and attention on No Rest for the Wicked. And that pretty much catches up to the present. Now I teach game design to those willing and jump on video calls with strange and interesting folks like yourself to tell stories.
That's amazing. And I want to get into kind of how you're teaching and you're passing on all your wisdom that you've gained through the years. My first question would be, how did game design change over the past kind of decade and a half? Like you started right at the start of TBC, so that's 2007.
Yeah.
How did you kind of see the industry change around?
Whew, so much has changed. I think the biggest thing that changed was it used to be believed to be a mythical skill, like you were either born with it or you weren't, right? And there's this black box of people who could tell who were designers and who wasn't. And once I got into the industry, I realized really quickly that it was not only not a black box, it was very much a trainable skill, right? But like most nascent industries that haven't, the developers haven't taken the time to learn how their own industry works, it feels magical even to them, right? In fact, talked to a lot of designers like, I just wing it, right? But if you look at what they do, it's actually procedural. Now, since then, I would say a few things have happened. One, we've got a lot more audience communication. Right? I think one of the biggest points of friction I had internally to Blizzard was that, hey, everyone had their friend they would ask about a piece of content or whatever. Oh, I know a guy who's a rogue and, gosh, Fires of Heaven or whatever, right? Um, or in my case, it was No Ma'am on BlackRock. But I realized that even though the whole thing was developers shouldn't talk to the audience, I'm like, but we're actually doing that. We're just not doing it very effectively or very efficiently. And there's just a couple figureheads who would talk on forums. So one of the things I've seen, and you can see this now, and probably everyone at Blizzard who wants to communicate with the community has a Twitter, right? They can just share and communicate directly. And when I joined at Riot, it was very much, yeah, we talk to players. That's how we may develop our games. We take that feedback, we iterate. Now I've been working with studios and they're like, yeah, we're going to bring in audience before we've even started the game, right? Or like literally when we're on the foundational steps where it's super rough and talk to them about what we're building and get feedback from them week to week to see if we're trending right. Like that is the level of difference. We've gone from these towers of secrecy, can't let anyone know what we're developing, to we got to tell everyone immediately, right? I think the pendulum may have swung a little too far the other way, but I think that direction is very much an improvement in a world where there's so many games.
I do, as someone, I work in old school RuneScape, and we are super community focused. But if
Yeah.
I just finished the Jason Schreier book on Blizzard, and it was really interesting to read how so much of gaming back then was like, we're going to build something that we think is fun. And we're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna, not even that we're not going, there just weren't the tools and the culture to go into the community first and
Sure.
play test and ask people, which I find so fascinating because when WoW came out, like it was just this brand new thing. Even when TBC was this first major
Yeah.
expansion, um, you guys didn't necessarily foolproof that the design
Yeah.
that the dungeons and everything. You guys just thought this is going to be fun. Let's do it.
Yeah.
What were one of the major lessons you learned from working on the Burning Crusade? Just to start there, like I'm
Oh.
sure there were loads, but maybe like one of the harder ones that you're like, okay, I thought this would be great, but it wasn't.
All right, I know exactly which story I'm gonna tell. So, wow, there's a lot of learning I did on Burning Crusade, right? I would say it was kind of like my design adolescence, right? Like the little game when I was 13 was my childhood. But there I had to learn how to be part of a team as well as how to learn and internalize, company philosophies and things like that. And the very first raid dungeon they gave me was Ramparts, right? The one that ended with,
Of
there was a
course.
demon fight and then there was a flying Drake, Nazan, and
Yes. Yes.
Bazrudin. Yeah, that was the very first dungeon I gave, but it was mostly planned out, right? GS Mercer basically said, hey, it's pretty much here, go and let Joe do this demon boss. I'm like, okay. Um, and for most part, it was like make a guy who life drains and make some minions that will kill themselves. And I'm like, okay, it's very simple, very straightforward stuff. And so it was pretty much placing things that had already been built down. I didn't really do much design until the end fight, where the story guy basically was like, can you make a flying dragon? I'm like, yeah, probably. And I didn't realize how far over my head I was getting doing this, but made it work eventually. Um, Anyways, as a result, that character was supposed to be that boss was supposed to be the second to last, but by nature of where it was placed and its visibility, people would always do it last because right near the exit, so they do that little circuit. And so, in a way, it ended up kind of stealing the thunder from Joe's boss. Joe's now the director on Diablo 4 and that team. He was his boss, was the final one, and the dragon flying around ended up being, the one that landed. Was the two phases was the one that stole the show. But that wasn't. But that was straightforward, right? I was like, okay, follow the numbers, do exactly what I'm told, easy. Then I was given the Underbog, and Mercer was like, oh, you
Oh,
did the first one fine. Just go and try some things. Play around with this. I don't really know what I'm doing here. We got a couple ideas from bosses. We just know one of them's going to be this weird stalker thing, like three, it's going to end up being
yeah,
this.
the long thing. Yeah.
Yeah, War of the Worlds. But we didn't have a model, so it was just like a dragon. It was just like a little dragon that was sitting in that room. And I'm like, okay, well, whatever. So I didn't really understand how to spawn a dungeon like that, and I dramatically overspawned it because I made it feel natural, right? I put all of these flying bug creatures whizzing around in swarms overhead. Do you remember the little canister with like the Hydra in it, and you would swim
Yes.
out the back? Okay. Well, that part, when you got to the crack in the back, I decided I wanted to make a tunnel full of bugs. And I'm like, let me just make a tunnel full of these terrifying bugs. It was such a long dungeon. I'm like, just make this easier. I'm going to AoE these 3 hit point creatures. but I didn't really understand at that point. I had a computer science background, but I didn't really understand performance, the way that bones drained performance, because all these little things controlling all these little things. And that usually when you have lots of little creatures, they're not the same fidelity as larger creatures. So I took the little silithid bugs from Courage and just scaled them down super tiny and put about 2,000 of them in this hallway. And I'm like, great, you're going to walk through and, psh, psh, and just hit AoEs and kill them. Yeah. Well, I had a brand new computer, and development computers are phenomenal, right? They're high performance. They have lots of memory. I think it was like like 8 gigs of memory back then, which is a big deal, right? Because we had to run servers and everyone ran their server. Well, I had about 2,000 of these creatures. And so eventually, this one guy, his name was Colin Murray. Yes, remember, because he was running around the office playing hockey or talking about playing hockey. I never actually saw him play hockey, but I'm assured that he did play hockey. Colin Murray goes, "Hey, man, I heard that this tunnel in your dungeon is super non-performant. I figure it's a level designer issue, but I figured, could you come over and look at it with me?" Like, yeah, let's take a look at it. And he's like, he walks in, he's like, "Oh, okay, there's a bunch of things flying around, not too bad." Then we go around, he's like, "Okay, well, line of sight, a lot of line of sight stuff going on here. Why does it start lagging when you get here?" It was like before you even got to this hallway. And I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, they did so much of polling. It was like, "What is this?" Goes over, walks through the wall. If he had clippings, he just turned the clipping off. He walks through the wall. He's like, "Oh my God, what is this?" I'm like, "I wanted a hallway full of bugs and I didn't want it to take too long to kill. So I just made them 100 hit points and super tiny." He's like, "Yeah, you can't do that."
You're breaking the game, man.
Yeah, he's like, "Yeah, computers, dude, do you know what most people play this game on?" I'm like, "No." Walked me down to quality assurance. And eventually, Mercer, the guy who was, running, my supervisor, did the same. Not this, but he sat down and said, "You can't do that, blah, blah." But he went down and like, "This is the computer that we test on. It's our min spec machine. Try loading this." It wouldn't even load. And I'm like, "Oh." He's like, "Yeah, you gotta like tone it back a lot." So deleted all of that, put in some regular spawns. I think it was like a cluster of a few like larger bugs, like 3 or 4 of them or something. I don't even remember these days. Anyways, put a guy with a druid with a hunter with a bear or something, or
Yes,
simple
exactly.
instead at the end, and then went out and then basically had nothing else until the stalker. And I had to go through and I had to prune so much shit. In fact, I think Scott came in at that point and was just like, "I'm just going to delete this and show you how this should be spawned." I'm like, "Okay." He kept the same monsters, but he's just like, "Have you pull tested this?" I'm like, "Pull testing?" He's like, "Oh." Right? Because there's all these habits that he had accumulated over the years of developing dungeons and how to approach them. And I had to learn all of them from scratch, right? So yeah. So that was like one of the first lessons I learned. And a little bit after that, I got to work on Karazhan. Now, Karazhan was a different beast, right? In that case, Scott had most of the enemies already built and planned out. It was just placing them. Or no, he did the placement. He did a lot of the placement of them there. I did the abilities and things with Joe. Joe and I were basically started like the same within a month of each other. Joe was the favored child, though. Mercer liked him a lot more because Joe was like chill and really like, he was funny, but he rarely spoke. You can tell I talk all the time. Right?
Oh yeah.
So I was kind of the black sheep of the design family at that generation. But I would do crazy shit that no one else would, right? So he was like, "Here, I'm going to give you a mage boss. Just make it the coolest mage ever." I'm like, "Okay." Shade of around. And so I went around and I walked over to Kevin Jordan. And I'm like, "What are all the abilities you cut on mages?" He's like, "Oh, I cut this, because let me look through the spell database." And I'm like, "Oh." I went and started just putting them back in on this super mage. And so I had this guy who was chain of icing people and casting pyroblasts and AoEs. And then I basically just said, "I'm going to do 3 unique abilities. Everything else is going to be cookie cutter mage shit, right?" And so I made, the arcane explosion. Oh, sorry, that alarm was to remind me this is when we're supposed to start.
Yeah, we started early.
So the very first one I made was an arcane explosion. I'm like, it's gonna make it big and you have to hide in the cubbies because this room, right, this environment had these little spaces. So I'm like, okay, teleport him to the center, AoE radius, done, right? And I actually made it a little smaller. You can actually stand outside the cubbies, but don't tell the players that. They don't want to know. Um, then the next one was a blizzard, but I'm like, blizzards always hold still. Let's make it move. And we just put it on a little clock. And by the way, to do that, you didn't have the ability to dynamically move or position AoE effects, right? So the way it works, there's actually a tiny little infernal, like this guy. And he runs around in a circle, and Shade of Aran is just throwing pulses of blizzard on top of that infernal every interval or so, which is why you sometimes can stand in the particles as you move out, as you get out of the way. And for the last one, I'm like, okay, I got Arcane, I got Frost, I got to do something with Fire. Well, one of these makes you run away, the other makes you run around in a circle, but not if you're melee. I need one that makes people do something differently. And one of my mentors before Blizzard talked about how there's this importance of pacing, right? Of taking a breath, of stopping, of putting intervals and space into your designs. And a lot of the design at that point was just frenetic, constant things happening, but put in intentional pauses. So I'm like, I'm going to make people stop moving. And so I talked to Rob Pardo and pitched him this idea. Rob Pardo is the president of design at this point. And I'm like, what if I made this thing and I had a fiery ring and I found this literally a bonfire that when I scaled it up, the particles emitted in a circle instead of in like a little bundle. It was literally a bonfire particle that I repurposed. And I'm like, what if I use this as a boundary, and if you cross it, you take a bunch of damage? You're like, oh, that sounds clean. Do it. So I went and did it. And sure, it worked, right? I tested it as I was a caster. This was another good lesson here. I tested it as a caster player, right? Sitting in there in the back. And I'm like, I run around and fire up. I'm standing in the middle. And because it was testing, and I only tested it independently, right? There was one person and one ring of fire, and if I moved around inside of it, everything was fine, no problems. And we got it through most of the testing. I got it to QA, and I'm like, all right, let's do some play testing. And I explained all the abilities to them. They then jumped on my server on like actual physical box, and we had 30, 40 people just churning. I think we churned for like 3 or 4 hours just on this fight as I was tuning hit points and damage and made the elementals spawn in and then made them spawn in different timing. Oh, and the big sheep moment. That was just sheer comedy. Like back in that day, mages would duel by sheeping someone and then pyroblasting them. So I put that in because it was like, homage to the way players played the game. And great, we got the tuning pretty good. But at most of the part, they're like, why are we setting off these AoEs? I'm like, just stop. Don't move out of them. And they're like, okay. So they just stopped moving completely. I'm like, okay, that's a fine solution. Right. Got to live and it was all working well. And then I realized what was happening. So you were a player of WoW, and I assume, are a lot of your audience players of WoW, or do we have some folks who haven't played WoW here?
I would say quite a few are. Absolutely.
Quite a few are. Okay. So in a raid, players are scattered around, right? So I would put this circle down around one person, but I didn't make sure it was that person who didn't have to leave. So, because if that was the way I'd set up, the game would have worked fine, right? It said, hey, you are the one who cannot leave the circle. It's fine. If anyone runs through, maybe give them some flavor damage, but don't do anything crazy. But instead, what happens is when you place the circle on one person, another person a few feet to left, and they're physically standing in fire, and they're like, I have been trained, I will not stand in the fire. And they run out of the fire. And that detonates the explosion effect, which I put in for flavor. I'm like, oh, it'll put a little bit of damage and make them knock up. So you can see who popped out, who messed up, and you can call them out, haha, you did the thing. Yeah. And, unfortunately, when we built that room, it had a pretty low ceiling, so you'd pop up a little bit and you'd fall down, wouldn't take any falling damage. But one of the artists seeing that was like, oh man, it'll look way better if I make the ceiling even higher. They raised the physical collider on the ceiling so you could fly way high up. Shipped live, and you flew way up, and then you would die. And when you died, you would go back into the AoE and you would detonate it a second time. So one person would pop and fall down, and then they would do a second explosion. And I am like, oh God, I need to fix this. I have to fix this right now. But the way back in those days, hotfixing wasn't as cleanly done back then. You could change fields, numbers. You couldn't really change scripts. Or you could, but it was very difficult to do. So I was like, I'll just fix it. Next time we patch, it'll be better. And GS Mercer came in and said, nope. People are, and this is when people had started a chant. you shall not move when flame wreath is cast or the raid will blow up. I don't remember the song. I'm sure there's someone out there who does.
Yeah.
But anyways, and I'm like, okay, this is silly. Let's just fix this. Back those days, no, if players found a way around it, you don't fix it. That's a philosophy I think was wrong then, and probably and understandably, he was trying to teach me a lesson about the consequence of my actions, but it just ended up hurting more players who wanted to play it later. In retrospect, knowing everything I know now, I could have hotfixed it, but I didn't have the technical sophistication or knowledge back when my third month there at Blizzard. Yeah, maybe it was later than 3 months. I don't know, but whatever. Yeah, and there were just so many stories like that of philosophies that were very, brutal and kind of harsh. This whole idea of going from 40 players to 10 players back to 20 players, right, was trying to figure out where the sweet spot was for social organization and groups. And so much has changed just in terms of like who the developers were. And you can see that changed. When the developers started, they were basically a little bit more than college kids. And so they had that hardcore mentality of we will wake up at a time to go raid Kazakhs or whatever has popped up. By the time I left in Burning Crusade, they mostly had families, they had kids, right? And so you see 10-man raiding became the focus and way more generous on terms of things that were more life flexible, daily quests and repeatables that basically put a lot of non-consequential stuff in the game and just making the game more accessible over and over again to acclimate to their lifestyle as their lives change from bored college student to professional adults with families, kids, and responsibilities.
So when you're designing all these different bosses and these raids and dungeons, how is it so you were just mentioning, is it the Blizzard kind of employees and the team and the designers that have changed, or is it also the player base that changes? Because I think part of the excitement, I think back in the day, and even so now in MMOs, is that you don't really know what's going on. Like sometimes a boss can be unfair and you have to figure it out. Sometimes a boss can be really hard and you just got to slug it out. Like, did you guys, like, were you guys trying to optimize? Because of course we kind of, the evolution of WoW is it slowly try to move towards retail and like this mystery, like I can't properly explain it, but there is this evolution. And I'm just wondering how much of it was spurred on by change in player behavior or by change in kind of internal design approach.
I think you both, right? You're kind of like in an arms race with the player base. When add-ons came out, you tried to build encounters that made it so you have to be careful about what you dispelled, and then that backfires, and then you're basically trying to ban the add-ons and so on, right? Design-wise, it's similar, right? As the audience did change over time, audience got older, right? They went to professional jobs. They didn't want to dedicate 80 hours a week anymore to a game, right? At the same time, our design philosophies and balancing capabilities changed as well, right? Even as we get better with game balance and scaling and understanding how this stuff. I remember when we hired Chad Nervig. He came in. He was a really great simulation guy. He made this thing called RAR that for one spec would basically calculate really closely how much actual damage a spec would do, and he'd point out issues with balance points. Right, we didn't have that level of insight. So as the players began doing things like collecting data, another thing is back in EverQuest, you wouldn't tell people what the secret was to beating a boss, right? Because your team would go and figure it out. But when I don't remember how to happen, but a combination of YouTube and also banning visibility for your guild by showing others how to do it, not only lowered the bar for rating and who could enter it, but also built a sort of pre-Twitch audience, right? About people, let me see, how did they do it? Wow, they really beat this, right? And all of a sudden, then people began writing guides, and then those guides became data mining, and then the data mining became the guides, and then eventually, I think it probably went too far when Blizzard started writing their own guides to the encounters inside the game. And I'm like, I remember at that point, I understood why they did it, but I just was like, where is the mystery at that point? And the philosophy, and this was a Kaplan thing, was always just like our philosophy needs to be the execution has to be interesting, not the learning of what's happening. And I think that's fair. At the same time, it also was kind of like I think that is where things kind of went very softcore. And I don't know, right? I mean, clearly the game's still going. The audience who's there loves it, and that's okay. That game isn't for me. In fact, I was never an MMO person. Like back as far as EverQuest, etc., I was not an MMO person. I just didn't enjoy it. So I ended up when I got a job working on MMOs, so I'm working in games. Period. Right? Leaned into it, and I, figured out just all right. I'm going to make this work. And looking back, I was trying to twist the game and change it to something that it wasn't supposed to be, whether it was vehicles or reworking classes or changing systems or mechanics or new PvP zones. I was always trying to bend the game into more actiony, more real time. Which, when I got to go work on League of Legends, like great, those abilities, that make sense. My sense of taste for the game was more closely aligned, except I wasn't quite as hardcore PvPer as most of those folks. Yeah. So it's hard, right, to say where did the line get crossed or what changed because it was just constant incremental changes, little tweaks. How do more people want to get into raids? More people want to see the story. Okay, here's a difficulty bar. People want to do dungeons, but they are unwilling to find each other. Okay, servers are becoming underpopulated as the audience is just collapsing. How do we help people find each other? And then that led to like things like the erosion of the social
Yes.
glue, right? I think that was really to me, that was the brutal moment. Anyways,
No, please. I was just saying that in a past episode. I was talking about how
yeah,
the group finder, I think,
yeah,
kind of took away the soul of kind of the game itself because
yeah,
so much of playing an MMORPG is going out and finding people and walking or running to the dungeon and waiting for
yeah,
someone and someone forgot to get their water or someone forgot to get something at the bank and these games have to mirror elements of real life. And I think when everything gets optimized, you
yeah,
lose something there. Even though on paper it makes sense, because on paper, people love to complain. You hear the complaints. Oh, it's so annoying to have to wait for someone. It's so annoying to have to go into slash trade and continually spamming for a tank and we can't find one. But there is something beautiful there. The same way that if you're doing a dungeon, like you don't want to know exactly what the answer is. What if like a raid guild gets stuck on it for weeks? Like that is something that creates mysticism for people working their way up in an MMO and be
mhm,
like, oh man, these guys still can't figure it out. No one can. What's going on? So I've always been almost very nostalgic about what classic WoW was, and even Burning Crusade to a certain
mhm,
extent, until you get to Wrath of the Lich King, where it was still an amazing expansion, but the seeds were being sowed of how
mm,
like the game was gonna change towards Cataclysm. But I, I I almost yearn for another MMO in the future that has that sense of mysticism, the sense of mystery
mm,
and discovery that maybe was just a product of the time. Like maybe now games nowadays we're so hooked up to YouTube and everyone's out there streaming and making guides and maybe we're never gonna have that absolutely mysterious world that we had at the
mm.
start with the first two expansions. And that's
Well,
what I'm longing for. That's what I
yeah.
love.
I mean, even when I was a child, right, Nintendo Power was releasing guides, but you could choose to read it or not read it, right? But I think the line has been crossed because of data mining more than anything. These game engines are ubiquitous. The ability to crack open data and look at it is very common. And once that line is crossed, anything you release is just exposed. There's just no way around it. I remember people would, one of the things Cosmos managed to succeed on was data mining because the guy that would distribute all our binaries would like, we'll plug it in with Thoughtbot and we'll give people credit for the first time they find an item. And that's really cool. I'm like, okay. And I couldn't afford to run a server. As a poor college student, I had $300 to my name. And I couldn't afford to handle the bandwidth for several million people, and my school wasn't gonna, keep letting me do that off my PC. And my computer couldn't handle it if I wanted to. So when this guy was like, "I run an ISP, I'll just put it on here and we'll package it with Thoughtbot and go," I'm like, "Okay, sure, that's fair. You get your data, I get my thing." But having all that information, right, also means that everything is exposed except for the data that's on the server. And so, single player games and so on. And to be fair, these things you saw happening, right, were very much at the height of the smoothing of games, right? Mobile games and casual games were surging in money because, hey, very accessible match 3 games was the way the world, right? Um, but what was I gonna say with this? But around, I think it was after Lich King, during Cataclysm, it was that Dark Souls came out, and I remember that went around the office, and I was like, I don't want to. I didn't, when Demon Souls came out, like I don't want to play a game that punishes me, right? When Dark Souls came out, oh gosh, why? I can see this guy's face. He was a former EQ developer. Um, it's gonna come to me as soon as I start talking. He was like, "Guys, you should go play Dark Souls." I'm like, I didn't like that Demon Souls thing. It just looked like you died all the time. It's like, you just got to get into it and get it. I'm like, fine, I will give it a try. You've been insisting on this forever. Steve Burke, and he went and played it, and I realized this game. Everyone made it such a big deal how hard this game was, but when I sat down and played it, I'm like, oh, it's not that this game is hard; it's that it's actually fair. It gives you all the information you need, but we are so desensitized to needing to watch animations on things. We play WoW and you ignore the attack animation of everything because they're always desynced anyways. We ignore the positioning. Why would you need to worry about where you're positioning to swing a melee attack? Why would I care how many times I push the button? This game made you care about all of the things it presented to you with stamina and hitboxes and dodge rolls and things like this. Things that now I look at it, I can dissect them and break them apart and build them up again in my sleep. But at the time, I tried to play it like the old Zelda games. I sat there, mashed a button, it just didn't work. But then once I realized that, oh, I'm not just getting hit with traps, I'm not just getting thrown at enemies. All of the hints I need are in the level design and in the world around me to look and see these things. Suddenly it was like, hey, this is a game that makes you wake up and look around. And I'm like, oh, this is what MMOs have lost.
That's exactly
you
it.
You can have two monsters on you. You just beat them up and you beat them. Oh, I think my camera may have flipped out. It'll come back in a minute. But you could have two enemies and beat them and it'd be no problem, right? But hey, it used to be that if something aggroed on you, it was a lethal, terrifying experience. If you walked into a camp and they had elites, you tried to fight them, you might be able to beat one and you were wiped out, but if a second aggroed on you, you're in trouble. So it made you depend on others. It made you listen to others. The same way that those little marks on the ground, you'd read those hints to be like, oh God, what's ahead? What do they mean? Try behind. Okay. Right. Whatever. Right. And trying to figure out what these hints meant to actually beat the content. You still had to figure it out yourself. That I think was kind of the thing. Like MMOs, not only like there was the whole. Do you remember? Were you there for the generation? It was after my time, where they started doing like little mystery quests and puzzles they didn't explain. You had to like find all these little rocks hidden around the planet. The WoW Secrets Discord, no.
No, so in terms of World of Warcraft, I kind of dropped off at a Cataclysm. And then I kind of picked it up again. I tried to get back into Cataclysm, I remember, but I think just kind of life happened, and then I fell back in really hard at WoW Classic because I wanted to play again, and I always tried to get back into retail, and it just didn't appeal to me in the same way, and I can't exactly explain why, but maybe I was struggling with the nostalgia, maybe the game wasn't the same as I left it, but it wasn't until WoW Classic came back around that I kind of just like fell back into it really hard. And then I do want to talk to you also about WoW Hardcore, because I think that's where, when you get the hardcore element of the game, that is where real MMORPG comes through. That's when you pick up a sword that has +2 stam as a level 11 Tauren warrior, and that means something to you, man. That's like everything counts instead of just like tearing through the game as fast as you can. I think the ability for people to just get a boost and go straight to the max level, or it to me, it turned off the whole idea of dedicating so much time to an MMO. If I'm going to spend a lot of time playing something and acquiring expertise and acquiring resource and making connections, I don't want to know that other people are just shooting past by spending money or what that is. So I think deep within me that affected me.
I do understand. At the same time, I also acknowledge that MMOs are social gravity wells, right? And at a certain level, people just want to spend time with their friends in a space. And some people don't have the ability to play alone. Like, it's basically a separate game when you're playing alone. It's like playing Skyrim, right? You got a bunch of quests and story and all this stuff, but you're alone. And that's not what was enjoyable at MMOs. So people want to I just need to spend time with my friends, right? Or we're playing Diablo, and you could go and run through Diablo dungeons, and your friends could come back and steamroll you to catch up with them, right? And because those games were not as consequential, there wasn't a lot of stakes, right? Just get through 30, 40, 50 levels. Okay, great. But those were bonding moments. They were social moments. And the solo play MMOs thing was not as much there for that, right? So it made sense to me why they put the skip in, but it definitely undermines that sense of investment when you realize $60 to me is nothing. Wait, $60 is less than half an hour. Why would I spend 62 hours if you're thinking about the end result? But yeah, I definitely think that. So this is probably the biggest hot take I have today, and it's that the evergreen nature of MMOs is both what keeps those social circles there, it also murders it. Right? It's what keeps people out. It makes it really exclusive and ultimately makes them difficult to sustain. I think
Yeah.
the games would be more interesting if we played more games together as with friends, right? And society, unfortunately, has devolved everything to the point where games with friends are either really simple and straightforward. You just kind of smash through content, right? It's kind of mindless grind, or, but yeah, it's difficult, right, to figure out. I don't know. It's a genie that can go back in the bottle. Reason I worked on No Rest of the Wicked is I wanted to make a cooperative multiplayer online experience in a shared space, but the world paused while you were at there, right? You go and
Yeah.
do things, and so we could go and like advance the quest or farm or whatever, advance things a little bit. But then when your friends were there, you could get together and go after whatever that mission was, whatever the next boss, the next, right? Because so much of Dark Souls is like, all right, I'm going to summon these guys in. It just makes it easy. I wanted to build a game that was focused around playing it with a team, you know? Because I really think that playing games with friends is probably why I started playing games,
Of
in the
course.
first place. My brother and I playing Mario Brothers 3, we taking turns watching each other learn and mess up and then make our own mistakes and, repeat, live, die, repeat. And then games like Secret of Mana, we know me and my brother and my sister, we'd play the games together and literally, sure, someone dies, just res them with or have them walk as a ghost for a while, but you actively had these experiences built together because people were physically co-located. Now we've got all this power of hardware, this capability, and that's beautiful. But unless you're playing with others, right, and creating experiences for others, things just kind of drift as, okay, we're playing a game in separate spaces that might be similar. It's not quite the same. Just the way that, I don't want to call it, it's not narcissistic, but it's a bit voyeuristic, structure of Twitches, which is like there's this person, you get to see their life and their expression, the way they're living their life, but they don't have that same level of connection to you, right? But still you see these small communities like 60, 100 people really frequently will become, bond very tightly. You go to TwitchCon and it's not a con about Twitch as a whole, it's about meeting your little bucket of 100 people, right? Um, and that's interesting. But, I'd love to see more games where people are just collaborating together in real time. Then you saw the rise of survival games and all of it. Aha, here it is. Now we're playing Minecraft together. Now we're playing survival games. Now we're building things. We're creating structure together. But all those games at short lifespans. Um, and that's, I think, almost caught up to where we are now. We're in this place where we so deeply desire connection with others. And almost by being basically chat rooms with a game attached. You
Yes.
built those connections with people, seeing them in Orgrimmar day after day. You saw the same person leveling up with you, and you're like, I've seen you around before. You seem competent. And then they burn you, or they do a bad pull, and you spite them, and you refuse to bring them as your tank. Or you meet them again, they've leveled up, and they got good gear, and they've learned it, and you're like, let your bygones be bygones, right? Had community. And Dungeon Finder eroded that
Yes.
community, and that was the problem with Dungeon Finder.
Did you guys
Wasn't
realize at the time? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but did you guys realize at the time when Dungeon Finder was there anyone in the room saying
Yeah.
we shouldn't add Dungeon Finder?
There was a few, but ultimately they weren't the ones in charge, and also, um, you know, uh, I mean, there was a. This was about when WoW was starting to peak, right? Peak and fall down, and so there was a desperation, and not even a desperation, and a genuine need, right, to try to let people continue playing the game, right? If you're looking at subscriber counts going down, you don't think, how do I make this game more exclusive? You start asking, how do I make more people feel comfortable playing more of the game, right? And so this was one of many decisions that stacked in that direction. Um, And again, I don't know, right? I mean, it still had went in decline. It eventually stabilized, and maybe it was always going to stabilize, and maybe it was the changes they made afterwards. Maybe it was reworking classes, maybe it was other things. There's a lot of things that we saw spike people up for little bits. At the end of the day, it's always a content treadmill. You can't produce content faster than players will consume it. It's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the MMO problem.
It makes me think so much, man. Like, I just want to touch one more time on
Yeah.
hardcore because that's kind of, to me, the foundations of a great MMO. The theory
Mm.
I have is that great games have to reflect elements of real life, risk, social hierarchy, working together,
Mm.
exclusivity, uh, time investment, and the beauty of kind of hardcore WoW. When I first started playing it, it was
Yeah.
just an add-on, man. Like you just basically jumped into classic servers and you had an add-on that would tell you if you died or not. If you died, you could have kept going, but this add-on would basically like flag people and say, "Hey, this player has not died yet. This one hasn't." And the
Uh,
cool thing is that we populated these empty servers with these because no one would play these empty classic servers because everyone's
yeah.
kind of either moving on.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if it was because the first time it always feels great, but it felt so amazing to be taking a boat from Menethil Harbor, getting to Darkshore, and you're hopping off, and then you're looking at another player walking across, and you can check his or her gear, and that's like their gear, man. Like
Yeah.
there's no auction house in hardcore, there's no mailbox. Like it is what you find in the world, and all of a sudden, everything mattered. Like every speed potion you pick up, like in if you're playing Horde, you pick one up in the Crossroads. Like you harbor that stuff, man. Like that stuff matters. It's not
Mm.
something that you just pop in a dungeon because it's fun. No, that's gonna help you survive someday. And
Yeah.
I haven't been able to. I always keep questioning, like, is the next great big MMO, or maybe it's just an obsession of mine, but does it take advantage of just reflecting real life scarcity, reflecting real life risk? Like if someone dies in a dungeon, man, everyone's mourning that person. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you've seen OnlyFans, the content creators that they created like a hardcore guild of all the streamers. That was some of the best content, man, because
Yeah.
again, it mirrors real life.
Yeah.
So just,
People didn't
if
make it. I remember seeing that they did Ragnaros, right? And someone died at the very last second, and they're like, "Oh." Yeah.
because it feels real, because it feels like everyone knows that the amount of time required to get to that point and the amount of organization and
Yeah.
it is a sacrifice, and without that it doesn't feel real anymore. Without me
Mm.
having to queue up for a dungeon and find another four people, and one of them I've had to kind of like sweet talk the healer to come because they weren't sure. They have to maybe go take care of their little brother, and you're like, no, please come on. I promise you, well, you can reserve this chest or whatever it is.
Mm.
It's that stuff makes it feel real. And I've struggled to find an MMO that hits that same nerve of
Mm.
take this stuff really seriously because everyone's taking it seriously and the
Mm.
world has never felt more alive. So I don't even know if this is really a question. I just kind of wanted to say this to I guess my first time ever getting to speak to a WoW designer, especially a caliber of
Sure.
yourself. And I just wanted to say like that's something that I've always kind of
Mm.
when I rediscovered in 2019, I was like, this is it. Like I've never been more hooked to a game than this.
Nice.
It feels like whatever you guys built in Classic and it
Mm.
just felt right in that situation when there's that death mechanic where you
That
can't
went
come
into
back.
that risk, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that audience will always be very niche, right? That's why it's powerful. When an audience is highly aligned with a product, right? In this case, the hardcore version of WoW, and literally a classic WoW, it was very lethal, very brutal. It made sense that it's going to be a broad product. That is going to be something a ton of people want to get into, who just want to hang and be in a chat room with their friends, right? But when you want that sort of high stakes experience, yeah, that's going to be appealing. You did hit on the scarcity thing, and I do want to mention that MMOs and many games, and generally games in general, have definitely undermined scarcity to a significant extent. So much so that even, there's that whole NFT era, like, oh, you're going to get a sword and be able to trade that sword and get that sword away. But that was never going to work. There was just simply no way for that to work because people don't actually like the significance of something you got is higher than the significance of that item in someone else's hands, right? So you're always going to have a higher valuation of what you hold and the memories with it than the person is going to have with the item. Otherwise, you're just farming whirlwind taxes on the auction house, right? But the other thing is like players are not actually interested in playing games where things are scarce. They have been conditioned to getting these drip feeds of items over time, right? Whether from quests or guaranteed item drops. You look at Burning Crusade and the item gear was very smooth compared to Classic, which was like maybe you never find an item for a given slot until you got to dungeons at the end of it, right? And so, in a way, the WoW progression, that drip feed of progression, the even Skyrim and other things like that have basically inoculated against true scarcity being a viable thing for most games, right? You look at, survival games which got close to this. Things actually become abundant once you know how to, harvest them. Once you know how to actually, find the resource, find the minerals, bring them together. And so I think that the scarcity thing is mostly an illusion, right? Except in these cases you're talking about where when someone dies, they actually destroy all of their investment in it, which is why it worked in that situation. So it was one of those where it's like, oh, that's really powerful. But it's very difficult to talk someone into that when they're going into unknowns, as opposed to, I've beaten the game before, let me go and do it. Even Diablo, right? You played the whole game through. I'll make a hardcore character, but you know every beat and every difficulty. You're going to see those little spitting monsters. You're like, gotta get those things or they will kill me, right? But if you didn't know about that, you just feel cheesed constantly by everything new and surprising.
That's 100% right. I think in that way, I'm being a little bit naive in the sense that when I play hardcore, I would know exactly the route to take to get to level 10, right? And I would kind of go on autopilot until I get out of kind of Mulgore or whatever it is, or Don Moreau. So I think in a certain sense, I have to agree. Like the people who do play hardcore are the people that have like broken down and understood this game at a level that it's the only way you can play it, because the level of risk and time required to even get to that point, like you must be mad to like start the game fresh and have no idea what's going on and not understand how the game works, and then just start dying at level 4, level 5, level 7, and you're like, what am I doing in my life? No, like I agree. There is this bit of a balance back and forth. I wanted to
like Binding of Isaac or roguelikes where you die and if you start, it's a 20-minute run, maybe an hour and a really long successful run, right? It's not a big deal. It's not a big loss of investment. Whereas hardcore WoW is, a massive investment. Yeah. In fact, all the investment you need to do to train yourself up on skills in order to get that payout, that emotional payout, is immense. So I'm sorry to kind of, burst your bubble on that one, but I don't think. I think that there could probably be two types of games, right? You could have games that add this as a veneer, and everyone who has never died is in one realm. The moment you die, you get ghost, your soul is transported to the after realm. It's identical. You get to play all the content and keep going, right? The other alternative is people who go and play the game and then can basically say, okay, I'm going to go now, spawn a hardcore character. Other people who want to be hardcore and go for it. And you basically put your hardest difficulty tier in that layer of the game and don't even expose that for the regulars, right? The regulars are going to play the game, learn the content. All the abilities will be there, but the tuning is 30% easier, right? Just like, okay. But if you really want to challenge yourself as hard as possible, you need to go and play that other route. But again, you're building a niche feature for a niche audience in an expensive way, potentially. Maybe not that expensive, but it's pretty expensive. Like, it's a lot of emotional investment in fixing all the, like, someone lags out and dies. No one really wants to lose to lag. You want to lose to bad decisions, right?
That's what it is. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's the other thing.
Do you think there's ever going to be, MMORPGs are notoriously hard, just for context, to create and to make. And I think a lot of companies have tried, and you've had Riot announcing an MMO, and now no one really understands like what's going on with that. Like they cancel it, and now there are rumors that it started again, or that they've never really stopped. What do you think is the tenets of the next big MMORPG? Will there ever be another World of Warcraft moment where the world is just taken by storm by this MMO? Because now you have MOBAs and you have all these battle royales, and that kind of seems to be the mainstay for like a lot of the games going around. So
So you've got a bunch of issues, right? A lot of the success of MMOs was based upon hardware limitations of very simple gameplay, right? Even WoW, at the end of the day, was push buttons every couple seconds and something happens, right? There was a lot of ceremony to make it look like you are casting a shadow bolt immediately, and there's queuing and all this other stuff to dampen the latency. But at the end of the day, it was infrequent events happening over many servers with a few people that felt like you were part of a big community. And when you saw 1,000 people together, it would like lag to shit, and you didn't really you didn't do combat. You had people standing around watching something play out. And once you take away that veneer and you look at what the modern fidelity is, which is, animations and hitboxes and things like that, that resists 1,000-person games. That pushes it comfortably in the 10-player games or the 20-player games. The places you can get that level of fidelity. I don't think it's that long until we see like Dark Souls-esque games with 10 people, right? Well, I don't think we'll ever. Well, unless there's some dramatic step up in deterministic computing, probably won't see that at the hundreds. Maybe like we see Fall Guys. So like, how simple is Fall Guys? Walk around, some physics, go. Then we see that at 100, right? We're not going to see that at 1,000. We're not going to see that sort of fidelity at 1,000. But that's where the level of sophistication and taste is developing for people. So if you put 1,000 people in a server, but you can see them 10, 15 at a time, in a world, I think that is probably that stage. But that I think, unfortunately, is the fidelity. It's something I was working towards for a while with some of the previous projects I was on, trying to hit that level of fidelity, but also understand how many of those people you could put together and have it be a decent experience. The other thing is you look at, WoW and no physics, like basically like UFL. That was it, right? Colliders and UFall. Modern games have animations and hitboxes and timing and rollback and all of these things that, in order to make a high quality experience, resist large player scale. So, I think there is a place for a bigger world. There's a place for games where you see others as you wander around. But the mountain to overcome to get the same feeling and effect, look at like, not Blade and Soul. What was it? Came out a while ago. Give me a second here. Throne and Liberty, right? That game was beautiful. Its opening sequence was cinematic. But at the end of the day, I could see the cracks where it still felt like the old turn-based MMOs and the server-side synchronization and all the delays and all of this cinematic presentation they put on top of it to cover up the fact that its fundamental structure is kind of broken. That the treadmill and the amount of time and the amount of money people are willing to pay is different now for how much time they're willing to spend in a space and progress on a game. It'll probably happen again someday, but it's going to require a lot. It's going to require a lot to pull people from many genres in, and also to figure out who it's going to cater towards, because really, WoW was a phenomenon because a game like that was accessible and scalable, and everyone kind of trusted Blizzard to give it a try, isn't something I see happening again, right? Look at like who has that level of goodwill right now to a certain degree. Epic Games, right, with Fortnite, and then Fortnite went multiverse, right, and just like, hey, we got a billion little things going on, and they raised the bar, I think, of presentation and ceremony and things like that. But I haven't seen them say, and they're like, all right, cool, we're gonna give 100 people and they're all shooting each other, but really you see 10 people and then we eventually kill you down until you have another 10 people. Okay, the game works, right? Then you have the battle royale structure. I haven't seen anyone really deliver well. Even Destiny 2, right, is still very kind of delayed MMO-ish. Hit that level of fidelity with like 100 people, right? So I think it's just really challenging. There's just a lot of technical problems. There's a lot of design problems. There's a lot of changes in audience taste and expectation that have to be overcome before we can see another colossal game like that.
Is it a generational thing? Like, is it that people will only? I see this with old school RuneScape, but especially with World of Warcraft, like the people coming back. Like, is it that we just the
Yeah.
new kids of today, or just the later generation, the later generations that came around, are just not attracted to these games? Because I think there is something about, like, I always say this even in the office, like World of Warcraft was my first love, and it's always going to be my first love. Almost
Sure.
like it's your first girlfriend. Like, I can't explain it, but I love that game.
My first girlfriend, I think I'm happy to forget. um, was my first or my second? Second. Actually, first was okay. First was okay. The second was very forgettable. Anyways, I'm getting off the baggage train there. Yeah, I definitely think that that's the gravity well effect, right? When you play a game, you invest that much time in. Like, I think League of Legends was that for a lot of people in
Yeah.
the generation after millennials, right? I think that Fortnite is the current equivalent of that. We just put a lot of time into it. And really, those games are more about the people you're playing with. Someone said to me, I can't remember whether it was Gen Z or Gen Alpha, was the Snapchat generation, which is you have your 10 friends in a group chat, and those are your friends, and you talk to them, right? Whereas, the millennial generation was, we've just connected to all these people. Most people aren't scammers, but you're also a little wary of each other, so you want to interact with each other somewhere safe. Now the current generation is very much about genuineness and trying to sort through all the manipulation that's going on right now, right? And so that changes the size of the people you're willing to interact with. When the internet came out, it was a research platform, right? When I was young, the content on there was mostly trustworthy. The people on there were mostly all trying to figure this out. 5 to 10 years later, it'd been built on that trust. Okay, there wasn't a ton of merchandising, commercialization. There was just like, okay, you had your Yahoo, you had Google coming around, right? Thank you, Google. Stop. Hey, Google, stop. Speaking of Google, she can't stay out of it.
There we go. That's telling.
Anyway, that was funny. Anyways, point being that there was that level of trust and interest in interacting with people at scale, and now I think there isn't. I think people have very much been recompartmentalized, both whether it's just social media. Hi, Uncle Bowser. How you doing? All right. And have smaller communities online, smaller group chats, and they aren't as willing to go into these open spaces. So I think it is a bit generational. I think it's also the fact that the fidelity level needs to be way higher. I think the closest thing to this might be Roblox, right? Because you play Roblox with many people, you go into a game, you might see the same people come back to that. And also that hidden age where people were used to just churning little experiences with the same group of people. But I still don't see people building 100-person communities as often, unless they're at the center of it, Twitch streamer style or YouTube performer, or hi, I'm a dude teaching how to do game design on LinkedIn, right? And I'm got a Discord to come hang out with me, right? So yeah, I definitely think that it's changed, right? It's gone from symmetric relationships at this larger size, but they're kind of shallow, right? But you spend time and then they deepen, to now they're asymmetrical and shallower at the same time, right? And that's just a really tough place to be. And so I think we're going to see a generation first that tries to accommodate the gaming to the society we have now. And then when people change in what they desire and what they want to experience, that's when we see games follow.
And that's what makes games so fascinating. I wanted to pivot a little bit now to League of Legends, because
Sure.
I think the audience definitely wants to hear a little bit about what you've done on LoL. And I started playing
That was a
2011, so I started playing right at the start of not like, I think a year after it came out. And
Yeah.
one of the things I was most fascinated with was the evolution of the game, and just like how
yeah.
that old UI was kind of orangey and like kind of like
Yeah.
clunky, and then you just kind of it's
it was
become
such a
such a modern thing, and now it's like a national sport in Korea, and
Yeah.
it's the biggest esport in the world, and it's
Yeah.
how was that? How was
That was a
working on League of Legends?
ride.
Yeah.
Okay. My League of Legends story started in the living room of the apartment I shared with Tom Cadwell. And he was, the design director, or back in that day, design consultant on this game. They had like 7 people working on it. He drags me in. It's this Candyland game. And I had barely played Dota more than a couple of times. And he's like, come in and play this. I want to see what you do. And I walked right up to a tower and died. I'm like, okay, that kind of sucked. He's like, well, if you need to wait for the minions. I'm like, why would I wait for the minions? I want to go kill the thing that's in the way. Anyways, and then eventually learned how to lane with him. And then he eventually got to a point where, I'd done okay at Blizzard, and he was like, "Will you start interviewing people for my game company?" I'm like, "Sure." So he would like interview in the middle of someone. He's like, ask this guy a question about Paladin. All right. So tell me about, what's your rotation? What are you planning? How do you strategize your itemization? What changes would you make to the class? Why would you make a change like that? Right. I think that's how we got Stephen DeRose, who's probably one of the best, most humblest designers we had on League of Legends. Yeah. And it was me interviewing him over, as I was sitting on the couch, because Tom's like, "Here, take this call and tell me if this answer's legit." I'm like, "Yeah, this guy deeply thinks about things, is really considerate and meticulous, asks clarifying questions, etc." I even remember, do you remember Twisted Fate? Do you remember Twisted Fate?
Of course, of course.
Card?
Yeah.
Yeah, we redesigned him around the dining room table one day when he came in. Like, we have this guy, and here's the current abilities. I'm like, those are all auto attack shitty abilities. Like, I know, let's make it better. So we came with a fan of cards, and I had this thing where it's like, it was really dumb, but it was like 1 through 13. You'd basically get a card, and that would add that damage to his next auto attack. And then I think it was DeRose actually took that and then said, "Oh, what if I just simplify that to number cards, face cards, and aces?" And that became blue, red, and gold, right? And then they just cycled on that and made a much better character, after just sitting around kibitzing. At this point, I was still at Blizzard. I was making good money. I'd finally gotten out of the really junior role that I had there. I had a little bit of agency in my life. And that was when Tom was like, come to lunch. I'm like, okay. Went to lunch, and I was having lunch with Tryndamere, Mark Merrill. And he was like ignoring me like completely at lunch as Cadwell and Ryan Scott were like having like good conversations. And Meryl's like, "Oh, no. And I'm like, "Hey, do you want to tell the rest of the class what you're up to on that phone over there?" He was kind of a bro. So I was like, "Oh, he'll probably take it on the nose." No, he didn't like it. He got really pissed. Like, "Who's this guy being an asshole?" Turns out he was actually like closing the deal with Tencent to sell the company, right? And over like at the table there as I'm sitting there, and they don't tell me until afterwards. Like, "Yeah, well, he was in the middle of literally signing paperwork for that." I'm like, "Oh, sorry about that." He's like, "Yeah, don't be such a dick." Anyways, I was like, "All right, let me just call him out for not, paying attention." Anyways, so I didn't join Riot on that go around. But after I got let go from Blizzard when we had a big hoo-ha and PvP and other stuff, and it's just my values weren't aligning with Blizzard, which is more taking WoW into maintenance mode, right? And kind of like keeping that sphere of silence. I've been blogging, and people were interested in hearing what I had to say. Like, I want to interact with players directly. That wasn't Blizzard philosophy. Blight, on their hand, though, was like, interviewed with them 3 days after. Actually, when I left Blizzard, I was like, "Fuck the games industry. I'm going to go serve pizzas." My plan is to go sit here. I was sitting outside of a pizza place, filling out I'm going to go deliver pizzas to pay the rent, because they gave me 3 days worth of pay when I left Blizzard. It was awful. And I'm like, all right, let me go do this. And that was when I got the call. "Hey, will you come up and interview with us?" I'm like, "Didn't I bomb out last time?" I'm like, "Well, we read what you wrote, and we actually think it's value aligned with us." I'm like, "Okay." So I ended up working with them, and they were like, "Yeah, go talk to the players, interact with them." And I did reworks, and I was, here's the plan for the rework. This is really messy. Don't commit to the details. Give me your feedback on it. And I would churn ideas and improve things and play test internally. And eventually, the Xerath rework came out, and the York rework was in development, and all of these other things that took years, right? But yeah, you asked a little bit about what I did on League. The most successful things were the Season 4 rework, making supports full class characters, right? Letting them have actual gold income, letting them be a part of the laning experience, working with Quo Yenlo, who I actually saw just a few days ago. We reworked the warding system, right, to replace all these, green ward and pink ward with the yellow trinket, the red trinket, and the blue trinket that all of a sudden survived now over a decade, almost unchanged.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my God, that worked. And we built it correctly. And just those are the big things. Oh, there's a lot of other small changes, like visual communication stuff, improving the visual language of the game. Adding icons when someone's recalling or teleporting or showing where wards are on the map, right? All of this stuff to help the team be a team in small, subtle ways. I really loved all of that small. They called the Strike Force team. It was Richard Huff was the lead, and I loved working for Richard. He was great. And we just took on things we could do in 15 days or less that just brought value to the players quickly. And that was great. It was like this high performance, high turnaround, highly technical team. We had to build everything, test it. That was my weakness. My weakness has always been in testing. And they gave me a gent named James Anderson, who was phenomenal, the best support you could ever have. Just come in, he would check my work, let me know what bugs were there. We would iterate and fix them before they got into the build. Most of the time, we had one feature, I think, shipped live. It was actually this little cheat I'd implemented for playtesting that was allowing people to rebalance the team size, like by moving money around amongst team members, which is fine. And internally, it was called the rebalance or equalize. It's called the equalize cheat. And it leaking into the PTR build. And then programmers got real angry about that. And I'm like, oh, I'm just building these things. Tell me how to turn them up and I'll do it. Because on WoW, I would build something and be 6 months before players saw it usually, right? Here I had 6 days and then people would see it if I didn't
be out, yeah.
Coordinate it off. So it was just a huge mindset change. I'm not used to that live service stuff. Yeah, gosh, what a great experience. Really loved my time. League of Legends. I grew up a lot as a person there too, just interacting with more diverse people. All of a sudden, being like an older person amongst the young designers who were like, all of a sudden, oh God, I have to be the responsible one, right? And I wasn't yet. Or things like just watching momentum of the perception and man, so much in young drama for peeps at that point who were insecure over things, myself included. Just wow, different life.
Well, I think part of it is one of the things I found fascinating with League of Legends is when I started playing, like everyone was like running into mid lane, like you had multiple people top, like no one understood how to play this type of game, right? Like it was again
2-1-2.
Dude, exactly.
Yeah.
And it just evolved. I think naturally games move towards a direction of bid maxing where players are trying to optimize and have the perfect structure. But to what extent was that you guys planning for it? And was it players reacting to the things you provide? Like you said, you dropped into different color wards.
Yeah.
How on earth, like I think everyone watching is just thinking, how on earth, if I were to make a game tomorrow, and it were to be as popular as League of Legends or even a fraction of it, how do you plan for that stuff? How do you plan for a meta?
You just iterate. Like that's the magic of League of Legends was that they had a 2-week turnaround cycle and they're just iterating constantly and they were listening to people. They are working with their community. They're changing things as much as they can. And then over time, they got better and better analytics teams and data teams. Devin, I've lost his last name. Amazing dude, wore big glasses. And he would provide us with this really clear data about what items were being used and at what rate on what champions. And so you did never use the data to make a decision, but you use the data to inform your decisions. So you understand what the impact is of your changes. It was phenomenal. It was just the most information focused, right, team that still let the designers pilot. And I think that was so powerful. I will say, looking at some of the crazy shit that went on the 2-1-2, I remember playing League of Legends with the raid team at Blizzard because I started playing before I worked on League.
Yeah.
And I remember jungling on Warwick for the first time, and Jeff Goodman was top laning solo, and it was 2 versus 1. He's like, why aren't you in lane with me? I'm like, no, this is the way the game is supposed to be played. I will get more powerful killing jungle things with this guy, and when I'm level 6, I'll show up and you'll be way strong. But he didn't know how to like sit back and auto attack. And I think he was playing like Darius or Garen or something like that top. And so he was like, what the fuck am I supposed to be doing? Right. And I didn't go up and I didn't know to gank. And he was super frustrated. And I'm like, no, this is going to be better. But they didn't get it. And I didn't know how to execute it well to prove it to them. And so then I had to start going back and laning until level 2 or 3. And then I could go to the jungle. Right. And yeah, God, it's one of those things where players discover things and there's pathways to things, but you don't know how much better it is. And a lot of that stuff only becomes effective once there's social buy-in from the community, right? So it wasn't until people watched more professional players. It's like, oh yeah, jungler. Look at how he just came out of the jungle and annihilated those top laners, right? And then someone else is in the jungle too. And then once it's one-on-one top lane, the pressure's off, and then all of a sudden everyone's jungling, right? You have to watch how communities shift and adapt, and then change your playbook effectively.
Yeah, the ebbs and flows.
Yeah. Just the same way that when people started flipping bot lane, top lane to put 2v1 and then try to tower rush, designers had to adapt. They had to change the rewards for top lane and bottom lane and put plating and all these other things to make it, to disincentivize that behavior, because it brought back the worst of the experience rather than the best of the experience when 2v2 laning. I will say that 2v2 laning with 2 melees was actually kind of a fun experience. And that was lost when the jungler phase came in and was dominant and strong. So yeah, you just have to be flexible and constantly adapting, and then create tools that might make it possible for people to break out of the rut, and just keep nudging the power of that tool until the rut is broken. And then you see, is that game experience better? And then if it's equivalent, you tamp it back so it's about balanced. You always want to have like I guess the big advice I have for anyone who's making a multiplayer game like this is you want to tamper the balance to be in favor of the less popular strategy, the more difficult strategy, the thing that is harder to execute, that requires more social buy-in. You need to like push it like 15, 20% too strong for people to buy in and learn it. And once it's socially adopted as a viable strategy, then you need to tamper it back down to fair. If you don't do that, people won't overcome that resistance. People are in ruts, right? And they need a certain amount of pull to break themselves out of those ruts. Same thing with specs on WoW, same thing with new champions, same thing with anything that breaks humans out of their pattern. If it's not about 15 to 30% appealing, they're not going to change.
And it's such a nuance, right? Because how do you say 15 to 30% better? Like obviously you can look at the
I can explain that actually. There's a very good reason why I would say 15. So the actual number is 1/8. Okay, you need to be 12.5% better for something to be viable, and that's what we found on World of Warcraft when we're looking at power upgrades on items. Was that you had 12 slots. I think, 8 major slots and a bunch of little ones, right? And if we did anything less than 13% across a new tier of gear, people said, it kind of doesn't really hit. And so we said, well, let's shoot for like 13 to 15. And it turns out that happens to be the threshold of where people are like, okay, 15%. Go look at games like Stellaris. What is the lowest? Like not the incremental bonuses, but the things that are like modal. 10 to 15%. They're always shooting between those numbers, that 12.5. And turns out that's just a human threshold for things are easier enough that the relearning feels valuable. Simple truth is if you do something 100 times, that 1% improvement is actually worthwhile. That's why you see like financial folks and people who understand snowballing and snacking, like 2% margins make the difference if you do it every single day. But for the normal person, it's like 12. All right. And so when you really want to hammer something home, you make something 30% more effective. All of a sudden, people are like, oh, this is solid. Think about crits. If crits are typically in WoW, they were 100%. People are like, wow, crits are amazing. 50% was the default. But some games with 25% crits, that's still pretty valuable. But most people are like, right? Like it's a random 25%. But you're like permanent 25%, like, oh, tell me about this. I want to know more, right? It's amazing the way psychology, numbers, and it actually comes down to something known as, the hit feel, right? How many events does it have to occur for an experience to change? Let's just take auto attacks against a target.
Yeah.
If I auto attack something 10 times, if I get a 1% value, I'm still hitting that thing 10 times. Okay. I don't physically notice it. Give me a 10% damage increase. I'd kill it like 9 times. Maybe. If it regens a little bit, it's still going to be 10. You go to 12.5%, now it's going to be let me see, that should be between 8 and 9. You feel all of a sudden it's now 20% faster, right? You're feeling that chunk. Yeah, 30%, you're like killing it in 6 hits. That's very noticeable. That's the actual piece that people experience and feel. That's why those numbers exist.
It's the ratios, man. That's so interesting. I've always kind of questioned how that
Yep.
works, but it is just finding that sweet spot. I wanted to
Perceptibility ratios. Yep.
I wanted to touch back quickly on you mentioned that there was a change in values, like that you had written some blog posts before joining Riot and before joining the League of Legends team. And that they had hired you because you had written some things and you had these values that aligned with them. What was the change
Yeah.
in values between kind of World of Warcraft that was going into kind of management mode and then Riot, which was like this young, bustling company? What made you stand
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, I'd say the few things were definitely an orientation on player feedback. I very much liked interacting with player feedback, iterating and managing their expectations as I worked through it. Right. My blog was called Breaking Open the Black Box, where I just talked about game design from the very basic level. It's still up there. You can go find my blog. It's on zelnath.com, or I think we were even moving most of the articles to gamedesignskills.com. And, I talked about very fundamental, very clean things. All of a sudden, people were like, oh, this is how design works. And no one was talking about design. You had like Will Wright and was like, here's how to run a design studio. But that's not what most people wanted to know. You look at his masterclass, and his masterclass is like how to run how to make a game as a studio. Most people don't have studios to pilot, right? They want to know how personal decisions were made. So I told stories. That's the other thing is I did 2 things. I told stories, I talked design, and I communicated with the public at a really human level, right? As clear and as human as I could be. Those were the big things. The other thing was obviously I had a mechanics design focused. I wasn't just all about fantasy and feel, which is great for games like Ori, where you're like, let's go make something whimsical and crazy. Not so great for games that need to be balanced, tightly tuned, and iterative, right? Yeah, I think those were the key elements. I think that made it the bringing me over to Riot pretty appealing.
What do you think designers need now, today, more than ever, to be successful in the industry? Like if I'm a young, bustling designer right now coming out of university, it's obviously a tough market. It's obviously so many of the games now are out there. It's tough to start your own thing. What do you look for in a designer?
Okay, those are 3 different questions.
There's a 3. I apologize. Let's start with the last one. What do you look for in a designer?
I look for in a designer is someone who can clearly communicate, has a structured approach to iterating and developing content, and lastly, is a deep sense of empathy for both the players and for the development team, and understands the impact of their decisions. The reason for that is you need someone who actually obviously understands their craft, understands their product, and understands the people that are involved on both ends of that.
So it's being someone who's highly communicative, but that is obsessive about a particular genre, or is it someone that's flexible?
That depends on the team. I actually think that you need different kind of designers in different kind of roles, right? I tend to be more cross-genre than some folks. If you need someone who's a highly tuned person or someone who can really handle things like animation, timing, and canceling for a fighting game, you want a specialist, right? So there's a place for both. Generalists tend to be more valuable on smaller teams, but they also tend to get lost in the weeds without having something they've specialized in. But I want to jump to the question you asked, which is what do designers need? And the answer is actually time and money. Time being the money is the thing that buys time. And we've gotten into an industry where things are a giant race and everyone's trying to ship a game in 2 years. And it's not about making products in 2 years. Like, that's doable. But the issue is the games we see being these super successes are either, let's talk about Among Us. What is Among Us? It's the French game Body retold in a spaceship, right? It was built upon, years and years of kids running around their houses in the dark going, I found the body. And then everyone talking about who they saw near the person who might have killed it, right? It's a very, and then they threw some mini games to make an online version of it work, right? League of Legends, same thing, was built upon Dota and years of iteration and tweaking to figure out the format and the structure that worked. Look at games like Caves of QUD, Caves of Cud. Game like that is in development for 10 years. Super unique, super memorable, very hardcore game, but very, very beatable by the people who take the time to actually engage with it. And you look at it and you realize that all of these games that are hits are really just having either taken up 6-7 years of polish from something else and then added a few years on top. You know, and those are the ones that succeed. But we have all these studios that puts together a team after 2 years that didn't hit market viability in their first run, and you're just like, games aren't actually built in 2 years. They're 5 years, they're 6 years, or 7 years to make something that actually has all of the crud removed from it, such that then it can be built up, improved, presented, scaled, right? Dark Souls was an iteration on top of Demon Souls, which was a little rough. Demon Souls was built upon some of the things they learned from Knight's Field, something like that. I forgot the exact name. And people seem to have forgotten this, is that games are generational, and all of these breakout hits aren't breakout hits. They're not a magical Okay, Balatro, I think, is a great example, right? We look at Balatro like, wow, this is crazy and simple, and this guy did it in 3-4 years, whatever. But that's building upon the fact that he had already been doing card games and variations on rules on deck building and things like that with his friends for 3, 4, 5 years before that. It was just picking one of them and putting all the crazy rules onto these Joker cards. And sure, yes, you can look at it and say, this could totally be built now. But it wasn't built now. It wasn't built in a day. These things are built over half a decade. WoW was in development for 10 years before it hit its stride. I think it was, half that was in development when it came out. And it was really rough, but it was actually, a few years after launch that it actually hit its, figured out what it wanted to be and was like polished and quality and had all of these things that lived. And even then it was built on top of EverQuest, which had a decade before that, right? And then before that, there was Ultima Online. And then the developers of Ultima Online and players of EverQuest came together, and they were working together as the core team with, by the way, the unsung hero of World of Warcraft is a guy named Eric Dodds. This is the mastermind behind World of Warcraft, behind Hearthstone. Ben Brodes, I love him to death, and he's doing great with Snap. But Eric Dodds is one of those guys that didn't have any limelight. He just worked quietly behind the scenes, but he was good at capturing all of these distinctive values and saying what needed to be done and brought together. And when I look at a lot of my own career, I look at it as really trying to recapture that essence of what he brought to teams, which is understanding how all these different little parts and pulling them apart and then bringing them back together into a newer thing that really is built up on 5, 6, 7 years of experiences elsewhere, and bringing in just enough of that new stuff to make games interesting. I don't know. So
games take time, man, and design takes time. What do you think about the statement? And Jobs has said this when he first went to Xerox and he took the user interface from to apply it to the operating system for Macintosh. Good artists copy, great artists steal.
Oh yeah, well, people love that. That's an incomplete statement, though, right? Everyone loves. Let me see if I can find.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find the full. What is it? Good copy, great steal. Full quote. Oh gosh. I'm trying to remember what the original quote was. There's more to it than that, right?
It was Pablo Picasso. I'm also looking at it as well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. Okay, and what he really meant was that the good artists, they just look at it, they just take the surface elements. They just kind of like, okay, cool, right? They kind of like take they copy and they kind of just take it. The people who steal deeply dig into it to understand the fundamentals of what it was that came together for that, so that then they could make it their own, right? You're not just seeing a drawing and like, oh, there's a game that's a battle royale. I'm going to go make a battle royale. They're like, no, what is it that made battle royale successful? It's time pressure. It's high community. It's funneling people into a big dramatic moment. And if you lose, you just get into the next game, right? Low stakes, high rewards for the longer you go in that session. Those are the deep values, and those can work. I don't know how Night Rain's doing, but then Night Rain is like, okay, I'm going to try to keep that sort of like same sense of being controlled and channeled into locations, the high pressure of being, in this space and not having control over your own destiny, right? That's trying to like take the real underlying lesson and reapply it. So,
But I do think there's a pressure to be original, though. Like people looking into the industry and not understanding that World of Warcraft, League of Legends, these are games that took immensely from the games that came before. World of Warcraft kind of took the EverQuest model and Ultima Online, and they're like, okay, how can we improve these systems and make them more accessible? Even though at the time, if we look back on it now, it is not as accessible as we think because gamers have changed. But and same thing with League of Legends, where it was so much based on Defense of the Ancients and the work that IceFrog did. And even so, a lot of the champions are taken from those archetypes. Look at Marvel Rivals today with Overwatch. Like they kind of just took, and Overwatch even borrowed from their predecessor. So what does it mean for a designer looking in and being like, what if they're putting so much pressure on themselves to be original? Like maybe that's not part of the game. It's like you got to take stuff that works and then, like you say, ingest it, make it yours, but stick to the guns.
Yeah, the issue is how can you make something original if you cannot deliver on the fundamentals? Did you ever do martial arts? Right?
Yes, karate.
They tell you all the time, learn your fundamentals. Learn how to do a punch, learn to stand right, learn to breathe right. Why are these things essential? Because once you've internalized them, the rest of the stuff is flourish and tweaks, right? And I see this all the time. I have a design class I'm teaching right now. And I'm teaching the most useful stuff right at the front. They don't even realize it, right? That's okay. I've gotten used to this as a teacher, is that I can't teach them the fancy thing up front because they tear the fancy thing like this is what I'll have to do, then they leave. Yeah. You have to like, no, you need to learn your fundamentals. You need to understand that the way that people emotionally connect with it. Can you break a product down? Can you really understand what's happening behind the scenes? Do you understand why it's happening behind the scenes? Can you communicate that? Because that's the fundamental thing that will teach you how to learn and how to adjust your game as you're exposed to newer content, right? And once you have that and you understand the intent behind it, once you understand the goals, the very first thing I teach them, the most powerful in the class, and that's three things. Whenever we have a debate or a disagreement with someone, hey, what are our goals here? Because if you're not aligned on goals, there's no point continuing with the rest of the conversation. Next, values. How important is this various elements of our goals to us? Is consistency really important? Is novelty really important? Whatever, right? And then finally, execution. What are the detailed things we're going to do? Goals, values, execution. You get that sorted out with most people, and the questions in design answer themselves. Okay. I can tell you that. But will you apply that? Will you consistently remember that? No, I have to put these kids, well, we're adults, a lot of the professional designers in this class actually, and basically have them sort out and sit down and they have an argument and they go nowhere. And I'm like, all right, what are your goals? What's important to each person? Then talk about what actions align you behind those goals and those values. And then they're like, oh, well, clearly this decision is the one that works the best out of the options we've considered. I'm like, congratulations, right? It doesn't matter that you can explain it in 5 minutes if people don't utilize it, right? Whereas something more advanced like, combinatorial systems for creating gameplay at scale. That's what I actually want to teach them. That's the actual lesson I want, but I can't get there if they first can't sit down and say, this is the goal of the content that I'm building. This is what the interactions that I'm chasing. This is the stuff that's important to me. This is what I want to achieve. Okay. There are many routes to achieving that. Now, once you know the goal, you can work backwards through different strategies that might get you there, as opposed to saying, put in an elemental system, do super effective. Great, congratulations, you're done. That worked for Pokemon because Pokemon was a game of memorization and delight and whimsy and story with a deeper layered systemic, like mathy thing for the competitive folks. And I don't even think that if the designers of Pokemon knew how far it was going to go, would have even built, they would have spent more time on PvP and interactive abilities. And you see a bit of a blend there over time. But that's okay. It wasn't necessary for what they needed to do. It was what they needed immediately in what's in front of them. That doesn't mean other games need to come out and just do super effective and expect that they're going to have the success of Pokemon, right? But you understand what they were going for. Hey, my choice of team matters. Hey, my choice of abilities, my choice of ability sequencing matters. Once you understand that those are the things that Pokemon actually won on, you can find modern ways of expressing those, and you look at it and you realize real quick that League of Legends characters are just Pokemon. What abilities do I use? What order do I use them in? Can I change the order up? And what situations can I get into that I apply them? Like, congratulations, there's your secret. League of Legends is Pokemon.
Alexander, this has been one of the most fascinating conversations I've had. It's
right.
been a true honor to speak to you, and you've been part of the biggest games in the world. And I will be putting a link for your class in the video below. But thank you so much again for taking the time, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, Alessandro, pleasure talking with you. And anyone else wants to hang out, come to the funsmith.club, Funsmith Club. Happy to chat with folks on Discord there. We have a 6,000 and growing group of game designers who all get together, have design discussions just like this one every day.